tra của mình, cố gắng hết sức là gì đây? Cố gắng hết sức trong bài kiểm tra của mình là gì đây? Hết sức là từ gì? Đúng rồi, do your best đúng không? Please do your best in your exam, đúng không? Hãy cố gắng. Cảm ơn, cố gắng hết sức trong bài kiểm tra của bạn đi. Rồi, ok. In the test, good job. Đúng nhá. Tiếp này. Cơn bão làm hỏng mái nhà. Cơn bão đúng không? Cơn bão. Vừa nãy mình thấy bạn nào nhỉ? Discipline có tornado đấy đúng không? Tornado đúng không? Lốc xoáy đúng không? Tornado là gì? Cơn bão là gì? Cơn bão storm đúng không? Làm hỏng mái nhà. Làm hỏng mái nhà là gì? Mái nhà là roof đúng không? Và mái nhà, thế còn làm hỏng là gì? Thật là make a damage. Do damage. Do damage. Do damage. Do damage. Do damage chứ nhá. Đây nhá. Làm hỏng mái nhà là do nhá. Do damage. Nó gần như do harm ấy. Đúng không? Cơn bão đúng không? The storm did damage to the roof, đúng không? Đó, cái đấy đúng hơn nhá. Do damage. Làm thí nghiệm nào. Bạn làm thí nghiệm đơn giản với nước. Làm thí nghiệm đơn giản với nước. Làm thí nghiệm đơn giản với nước thì là gì? Thí nghiệm là gì? Experiment đúng không? Experiment. Làm thí nghiệm để là gì? Do I make? Do an nhé. Làm thí nghiệm đúng không? Do an experiment. Do an experiment with. Làm thí nghiệm với cái gì đúng không? You are doing an experiment with water, right? Đúng không? Bạn đang làm một cái thí nghiệm đơn giản với nước đúng không? Đó. Experiment with something. Bạn tập thể dục nhẹ 10 phút, tập thể dục là gì đây? Tập thể dục. Tập thể dục. You do exercise for 10 minutes. Ok, good job. Rồi. Nhờ ai đó giúp mở cửa. Nhờ giúp mở cửa là gì? Nhờ giúp mở cửa. Light exercise đúng rồi, thể dục nhẹ đúng không? Nhẹ là light. Light là thể dục nhẹ nhàng đúng không? Kiểu yoga, các kiểu đấy. Rồi. Nhờ ai đó giúp mở cửa là gì? Yêu cầu hả? Yêu cầu. Thế vừa nãy mình học là gì đây? Do me a favor đúng không? uh, can you do me a favor and open the door đúng không? Can you do me a favor and open the door đúng không? Nhờ ai đó giúp mở cửa. Bạn giúp mình một việc nhỏ, họ rất cảm ơn. Giúp mình một việc nhỏ. Giúp việc gì? Là can you sao đấy? Do me a good turn by helping me my bag. Can you do me a good turn by helping me carry my bag? Đúng không? Bạn có thể giúp tôi làm ơn giúp tôi mang cái cặp giúp tôi được không? Can you do your friend a favor? Đúng không? Bạn có thể giúp bạn của bạn đúng không? Được rồi, ok, bạn có thể giúp bạn của bạn một tay được không? Ok nhé. Nhưng mà thực ra thì giúp tôi thì nó nghe nó tự nhiên hơn. Bạn có thể giúp bạn của bạn được không? Vì sao cái câu mà mình nói bạn có thể giúp bạn của bạn được không? Vì sao không giúp đi? Mình không giúp thì mình còn nói người khác. Bạn có thể Ừ, nghĩ hơi phức tạp. Rồi, tiếp nào. Ăn đồ ngọt quá nhiều gây hại cho răng. Gây hại là gì đây? Gây hại là gì? Ăn đồ ngọt quá nhiều là eating too much sugar. Thì làm sao đấy? Gây hại là gì đây? Hại là harm. Đúng rồi, do harm. Nó đi với từ gì? Do harm to nhé. Your teeth. Teeth, đúng không? Do harm. Eating too much sugar can do harm to your teeth, đúng không? Ok, good nha. Bạn làm tóc trước khi đi ra ngoài. Làm tóc là hair đúng không? Làm tóc là gì? Làm tóc là do your hair đúng không? Do my hair. Do gì go nhỉ? Do I do my hair before going out, đúng không? You do your hair before going out. Good. Bạn làm việc một chút vào buổi tối để kịp deadline. Ờ, có, mình cũng muốn mở ấy. Nhưng mà hiện tại thì mình chỉ biết mở bằng bình thường bình thường là mở như thế có mình có cái mở đấy đấy, nhưng mà hôm trước ấy thì mình xem ở trên mạng là mới nếu mà mở mở live mà mở qua di động ấy, mở qua di động thì mời các bạn lên được, nhưng mà mình vẫn chưa biết được là mời mở ở đâu để mình đang chị đang xem là mở ở đâu, nếu mà chị dùng máy tính thì mở ở đâu để cho các bạn tập nói ấy. Hôm mà chị cũng mời cho các bạn vào phòng, các bạn tương tác đấy. Hello em.
Oh, hello.
What's your name? What's your name? Can you hear me clearly?
Dạ, cái này thử thôi, lên thử.
Em bấm được đúng không? Em bấm vào cái nút nào ấy để sau chị bảo các bạn ấy, chị bảo các
Dạ,
bạn nhiều lần nhưng các
có
bạn không
có
bấm
cái
được.
nút ở dưới đây nhưng mà hình như là nếu như mà lên cái này thì chỉ được có 2 người.
Được nhá, có, ví dụ như là chị, ví dụ mà có dạy thì chị tương tác để nói chuyện trực tiếp thôi, chị sửa phát âm các kiểu ấy. Đó, hay là chị nói, đó thì đều được. Đó. Ok nhá. Rồi, mình là có chức năng này nhá. Lúc nào chị cũng mở cái này, các bạn vào có thể tương tác trực tiếp luôn với chị. Rồi. Ờ, rồi, ờ, rồi nào. Làm việc một chút vào buổi tối để kịp deadline, đúng không? Làm việc một chút buổi tối. Làm việc là gì đây? Do some work, đúng không? Nhớ là cái từ do homework ấy. Bây giờ work thì nó cũng là cái từ trong homework đúng không? Thì cũng là đi với do some work đúng không? I do a little bit work to meet my deadline, đúng không? Nó tôi làm việc một vài việc một chút để kịp deadline, ok? Rồi, bạn ủi quần áo cho ngày mai. Ủi quần áo là gì đấy? Là gì đây? Đúng rồi, do the ironing đúng không? Do the ironing. Do the ironing đúng không? Bạn ủi quần áo một chút, bạn ủi quần áo cho ngày mai đúng không? I'll do the ironing tomorrow đúng không? I for my family on Sunday I'll do on Sunday I do the ironing for my family đúng không? To prepare to be prepare for the next week đúng không? Cho chuẩn bị cho tuần tới đúng chưa? Bạn đi mua đồ cho gia đình vào cuối tuần đi xem nào. Bạn đi mua đồ, ui cái câu này dễ thế. Đi mua đồ là gì đây? Đúng rồi, do the shopping đúng không? I Other weekends I often do the shopping for my family, được chưa? Đó, ví dụ như thế. Cái good nha. Rồi, ok. Hiện tại thì hôm nay làm được 3 bài thôi, còn bài kia hôm nào còn thời gian thì mình sẽ làm tiếp nhá. Đó. Rồi, bài hôm nay các bạn cảm thấy thế nào? Có hiểu bài không? Nào, cho chị một cái tương tác nào, reaction và comment nào. Ok các bạn ơi. Hiểu bài không? Rồi, hiểu bài cho chị một tim nhá. Hiểu bài cho chị một tim, cho mình một tim nhá. Hiểu bài cho mình một tim nhá. Hiểu bài rồi, các bạn cố gắng là ghi chép, ghi chú từ vựng trưa và chiều các bạn có mở đấy. Đó, thì các em có thể xem của các giáo viên khác nhé. Còn lớp của chị Trang, của chị nhá, là chị mở từ 8 giờ đến 10 giờ, thứ hai thứ bảy hàng tuần, ok. Đó thì chị có thể dạy được là như các bạn đầu tiên chị đã dạy về IPA cho các bạn rồi này. Chị đã dạy về các thì hiện tại đơn, hiện tại tiếp diễn này, thì quá khứ đơn, quá khứ tiếp diễn này. Và chị cũng đã dạy, và hôm nay thì chị dạy về cái gì cho các bạn về về các cái collocation là gì này, đúng không? Có bao nhiêu loại collocation này, và mình collocation ứng dụng trong hàng ngày với từ make và từ do này, đúng không? Đó. Đó thì bây giờ các bạn có những cái yêu cầu như thế nào về các bài tập nhé, thì các bạn có thể comment nhé, để buổi sau, các buổi tới nhé, chị có thể lên bài nhé, lên bài để cho các bạn nhé. Đúng rồi, có Miss Duyên, Miss Lam Anh, đúng rồi. Ra có đầu tuần có cả Miss Ngọc nữa. Đó. Đó. Thấy Vinh Trần chăm học chăm học free talk. Thấy like của cô nào cũng vào tham gia tương tác rất nhiệt tình. Đó. Đó thì các bạn nhé, đấy là khung giờ của chị nhé. Còn free talk thì cả ngày. Sắp tới thì nếu mà chị mà có thể sắp xếp buổi tối, hoặc là free talk có thể bổ sung thêm buổi tối, có cô nào làm được buổi tối thì các bạn hoàn toàn có thể xem được cả buổi tối nữa. Live. Đúng rồi, live, đúng rồi. Free talk hầu như là họ mở vào cả ngày, hiện tại là đang có lịch vào ban ngày. Đúng rồi, nick free talk English Premium. Đó, đúng rồi. Vào nick của trung tâm tiếng Anh của mình luôn. Đó, free talk English Premium nhé, các bạn vào nhé. Sáng giờ của chị là từ 8 đến 10 giờ sáng, từ thứ hai đến thứ bảy hàng tuần. Hiện tại như thế, các cô thì có thể là sau giờ của chị này, hoặc là buổi chiều này. Đó thì các cô có vào, các hầu như trong tuần đều có. Buổi tối thì sau mở thì có, thì trung tâm sẽ mở thêm. Đó. Rồi, đó thì chị sẽ cố gắng đưa các bài về vì cái phát âm, từ vựng, ngữ pháp, cũng như là sắp tới thì không biết có bạn nào có muốn học giao tiếp không thì có thể là đăng ký nhé. Đó thì chị sẽ dạy cả giao tiếp nhé, không thì trước mắt mình cứ học từ vựng, ngữ pháp trước. Đó thì mình sẽ thay đổi. Đó thì mình sẽ thường là nó sẽ có liên quan, các bài nó sẽ liên quan đến nhau đấy. Đó, chị sẽ xem những cái chương trình trong những cái bài nó liên quan đến nhau, trong các cái quyển sách, hoặc là trong những cái một cái series gì đấy, nó sẽ liên quan đến nhau. Nếu như mà các bạn chưa có đề xuất thêm những cái chương trình nào mà các bạn mong muốn cá nhân đó, và nếu các bạn đề xuất thì cố gắng là tham gia nhé. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us today, and bye bye and see you tomorrow. Chào các bạn nhá, các bạn xuống like đi. Hẹn gặp lại vào ngày mai nhá, hẹn gặp lại vào 8 đến 10 giờ ngày mai mình lại gặp lại nhau nha. Xin chào các bạn xuống like đi ạ. Các bạn xuống like đi để mình xuống like ạ.
Link below for that. Up next is another special guest we had on, Di Davies, former head of Royal Protection. He explains why Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's activities deserve a proper police investigation. Do click here for that. What a great show this has been. Thank you so much. My thanks to Rebecca and our special guest, Elsa Anderson. I do hope you'll come back on the programme soon.
Thank you. Not on a day like today, though.
Yes, we need a little bit less excitement, I think, don't we? And thanks to you at home for watching. As always, we will see you next week. Bye for now.
On the 30th of October 2025, King Charles announced that he had initiated proceedings to remove the style, titles and honours of his brother, Prince Andrew, who through this process would come to be known as plain old Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. We would later discover that Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, would also lose all of her titles. On their wedding day, July the 23rd, 1986, they had been given the forever titles of Duke and Duchess of York by Queen Elizabeth. Yet less than 40 years later, thanks to a mind-blowing mix of mendacity and hypocrisy, idiocy and arrogance, they, like the biblical figure Samson, had pulled the columns of the House of York down upon themselves. On this episode of Reading the Royals, we're going to explore the succession of self-authored scandals that rocked both Andrew and Fergie, focusing on the years 2019 to 2025, being the period when the damage done to their reputations switched from a slow creep to a sudden, calamitous crash. We're going to do this by interrogating a series of fascinating, revealing images taken across that period, In doing so, we're also going to ask, is this really the end for Andy and Fergie? And have the egregious sins of the parents already doomed their two daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie? In Ernest Hemingway's 1926 novel, The Sun Also Rises, a character is asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" He answers, "Gradually and then suddenly." And so it was with the downfall of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. Initially, the catastrophe came creeping before ending in a sudden, violent implosion. So much so that their demise felt both surprising, yet somehow inevitable at the same time. And there can be no doubt that the creep first set in January 2011, when a British Sunday newspaper published a photograph of convicted child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein walking in New York Central Park with Prince Andrew. The difficulty for Andrew was that the photograph was taken on the 5th of December 2010, barely 17 months after Epstein's release from prison. Here, for the entire world to see, was Prince Andrew, 8th in the line of succession, strolling nonchalantly in a public park with a man who pleaded guilty to a charge of procuring for prostitution a girl below the age of 18. At the time, Prince Andrew apologists used asinine phrases such as poor judgment and insinuations and innuendos, suggesting nothing to see here. Then, within days of this revelation, there was most definitely something to see. On the 27th of February 2011, in a world exclusive, the Mail on Sunday first published the now infamous image of Virginia Giuffre, Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell at Maxwell's Belgravia townhouse. The photograph was taken 10 years previously in March 2001, when Giuffre was just 17 years old. And though Andrew has denied the accusation to this day, this was when Virginia Giuffre said she was forced to have sexual intercourse with Andrew for the first time. However, it should be noted that this specific charge was not made public until December 2014 in a court filing, as part of civil proceedings taken against the federal government by Epstein victims, who claimed his controversial plea deal in 2008 had denied them certain legal rights. By way of response to Giuffre's accusations about the prince, the palace barely broke a sweat, commenting in January 2015, "This relates to long-standing and ongoing civil proceedings in the United States, to which the Duke of York is not a party. As such, we would not comment on the detail. However, for the avoidance of doubt, any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue." Not exactly the forceful, robust rebuttal of the incendiary claims made by Miss Giuffre that many observers would have expected or hoped for. It appeared that Andrew would be permitted by the establishment to be merely embarrassed by the whole affair, the only consequence having been his stepping down as a UK trade envoy in July 2011, 8 months after he was photographed with Epstein in a New York park. Then, the pattern merely repeated. Between 2014 and 2019, mentions of Epstein, Maxwell and Giuffre appeared perennially in the media, to be greeted by the same well-worn denials, followed by zero consequences for Prince Andrew, who continued to live in a 30-room mansion, Royal Lodge, and hold all his royal titles, including his membership of the Order of the Garter, Britain's highest order of, wait for it, chivalry. Which leads me to the first image I want to properly explore. Taken in 2019, a full 8 years after the Prince Andrew Epstein questions were first raised, and 4 years after Virginia Giuffre claimed that she had been trafficked to London by Epstein to have sexual intercourse with Prince Andrew. And where do we find the Duke of York? Walking in lockstep with the Queen at Buckingham Palace, on their way to a garden party. I mean, could an image tell a more resolute story? Andrew walking in the sunshine, alone with the Queen, on their way to an official function. The picture is at once carefree and formal, just another public engagement, just another day as the favourite son proudly striding by the Queen's right hand. Clearly, despite a growing cacophony of voices, Andrew remains safely cocooned inside the protective and steadfast, some would say unbothered, collective royal faith in his version of events. Indeed, as we can see from the official royal family Twitter account at the time, images of Andrew were given equal prominence to those of the future King and Queen, William and Catherine, at that very same garden party. In other words, as late as May 2019, Andrew was seemingly invulnerable. However, all of that was about to change, and the agent of doom would be the Duke himself. In 2019, a guest booker on the BBC current affairs programme Newsnight received an offer of an interview with Prince Andrew concerning his charity work. They declined, in part because the palace was immovable on a single point. Absolutely no questions about Jeffrey Epstein, period. Despite the reticence from Newsnight producers, the initial exchange developed into a months-long negotiation about the scope of a potential future interview. Then, on the 10th of August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his New York prison cell, where he was awaiting trial on a fresh set of charges relating to the alleged sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. Andrew's most notorious friend was again making headlines across the world. In part due to the renewed creeping pressure on Andrew, the interview negotiations shifted to warp speed. There would be a Newsnight interview after all. It would be conducted by the veteran British journalist Emily Maitlis, but most crucially, the palace dropped their stipulation that there could be no questions about Epstein. Newsnight would have an hour of the prince's time on any topic they deemed newsworthy. And so, on November the 14th, 2019, Emily Maitlis sat down with Prince Andrew in Buckingham Palace, and I have absolutely no doubt that when the TV lights were turned on, Andrew had no idea that the next 60 minutes of his life were about to shape the rest of his life. And this leads us on to the next photograph I want to interrogate. It's a still image of one of the camera angles used in the final Newsnight film, and I find the body language utterly fascinating. If we zoom in here, we see Andrew's posture, how he shifted slightly in his seat so he can be closer to Emily Maitlis. This is often interpreted as a sign of someone who is eager to be heard, compelling them to close the space between themselves and the listener. At the same time, Andrew's legs are firmly crossed, typically read as a defensive or closed-off posture. But as you can see, they're pointed away from Maitlis, suggesting, though alert of any potential conflict, he feels comfortable, fully in control of the engagement. Meanwhile, Maitlis leans her shoulders and heads slightly forward, signalling to the prince that she's attentive and engaged, encouraging him to believe he hasn't put a foot wrong. This combination of Andrew's galaxy-class arrogance and Maitlis's willingness to let him dig his own grave at his own speed resulted in the first hatchet job interview I've ever witnessed that was carried out entirely by the subject on himself. To be clear, I believe the BBC and Maitlis acted in good faith throughout. It was Andrew who wove the rope, tied the knot, and then placed the noose around his own neck. For example, in the course of the interview, he made the following jaw-dropping claims: that he didn't fully regret consorting with Epstein because, and I quote, "the opportunities that I was given because of him were actually very useful." He also claimed he had never met Virginia Giuffre and implied that the photograph of them together, taken in Ghislaine Maxwell's house in 2001, must have been faked. When asked about having his hand around Virginia Giuffre's waist in the photograph, he said, and I quote, "I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do." This despite the fact that Andrew must have been aware of the existence of these images taken in 2007 at a series of wild parties on the French Riviera. I mean, seriously, Andrew, if you're going to defend yourself by claiming you're not a touchy-feely person, at least first make sure the internet doesn't have the kind of receipts that can confirm you're a full fat liar, and an amateur one at that. And while we're on the subject of using your self-declared character as a defence against claims of appalling behaviour, who could forget Andrew's assertion in the interview that the real reason he stayed in Jeffrey Epstein's home in 2010 was because of his tendency to be, and I quote, "too honourable." That's right, Andrew asked the British public to swallow the line that it would have been dishonourable to break off a friendship with a convicted sex offender by email, because the decent thing to do would be to tell the chap to his face that they couldn't be best pals anymore. A duty, by the way, that also required Andrew to stay in the New York mansion of that same paedophile for 3 days. As galling and disgusting as this is, perhaps the most astonishing part is how well Andrew thought the interview had actually gone. According to Sam McAllister, the booker who received the initial interview offer in 2019, the Prince was, and I quote, delighted after the interview, inviting the Newsnight team to stick around for a cinema night at Buckingham Palace. Hearing this, it's impossible to not be reminded that according to the journalist Tina Brown, Epstein himself believed Andrew to be an idiot. Indeed, it wasn't until the Queen saw a transcript of the interview and Andrew received, according to Maitless, a tap on the shoulder from the palace, that he came to realise things hadn't perhaps gone as brilliantly as he imagined. Let's not forget either that according to Paul Burrell, the CEO of the family business was Prince Philip. One can only imagine the fire and brimstone bollocking that Prince Philip would have delivered to his son upon learning that he had given such a crassly naive, self-destructive interview. 72 hours after Newsnight aired, a shell-shocked Prince Andrew was forced to announce that he was stepping back from all royal duties for the foreseeable future. What was even worse from the palace's perspective was that legal experts were warning publicly that Andrew had clearly made specific claims in the interview that could fall under colour of libel. For example, when Maitless asked about the claims Giuffre made in a 2015 deposition that Andrew had sex with her when she was 17, he replied, "I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened." Lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic believed, with those 9 words, Andrew had effectively called Virginia Giuffre a liar, meaning that she would have possible grounds to take legal action for defamation, were she to choose to do so. This set a clock running, where Giuffre could potentially sue Andrew for libel at any time, dangling a civil suit sword of Damocles over his head for the next 3 years. Indeed, as it turned out, Giuffre would go on to sue Andrew for damages in August 2021, but more on that later. In any event, without question, I believe the Prince's Newsnight interview in 2019 was the moment the creep phase of the Epstein-Andrew scandal began for the first time to feel like a full-blown crisis. Meanwhile, coincidentally, the day after the Newsnight interview took place, this photograph was taken. Captured on the 15th of November 2019 in Venice, being the day before Andrew's disastrous Maitless interview was broadcast, we find a carefree, playful Duchess of York frolicking with the model Jodie Kidd. Irrespective of the unfortunate timing for the House of York, to my mind this image also stands alone as classic Fergie. Travelling to the city to visit flood victims after the Venetian overflowed for the second time in a week, causing billions of euros worth of damage and leading to the death of at least one person, Fergie, true to form, allows herself to be photographed as if she's on a replica set of Singing in the Rain. Despite a state of emergency being declared in the city, clearly Fergie just wants to have fun. 1,100 miles away, the image was met with particular contempt by residents of South Yorkshire, who at the same time were also the victims of devastating floods, which Fergie didn't feel so inclined to visit, despite the deluge occurring in a part of the United Kingdom, Yorkshire, so closely associated with her royal title, Duchess of York. One resident of the town of Fishlake made no attempt to hide their disgust. Why doesn't she put her wellies on and come up here to see what normal folk have had to put up with the last few weeks? Just because we don't have fancy palaces and canals doesn't mean we aren't suffering as much as people in Venice. For literally decades, apologists had been excusing the Duchess's various gaffes and blunders as Fergie being Fergie, and for the most part it proved a canny winning stratagem. The Duchess came to be widely perceived as a deeply unserious person, the advantage being it seemed markedly obtuse to harbour any ill will towards an individual so often parodied as manifestly shallow and inconsequential. It was therefore hardly surprising that the growing storm around her ex-husband didn't appear to affect her standing in any way. To put it bluntly, she didn't have a serious reputation to protect, something encapsulated by Lord Charteris's devastatingly simple 3-word summary of his impression of the Duchess: vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. Thus, perhaps encouraged by her Teflon-esque scorecard in the hijinks department, Fergie felt very free in writing the following, since deleted, Instagram post on the subject of the Prince's impending Newsnight appearance. Andrew is a true and real gentleman. I'm deeply supportive and proud of this giant of a principled man, that dares to put his shoulder to the wind and stands firm with his sense of honour and truth. And with that social media post, without realising it, Fergie had just tied an Andrew-shaped anchor around her own neck. And just at the moment the floodwaters were beginning to lap over the foundations of the House of York. Which brings us to the next image I want to interrogate. Taken at Windsor on the 17th of April 2021 during the funeral of Prince Philip, who had died 8 days earlier, aged 99, it shows a family brought together in profoundest grief. Unfortunately, what it also illustrates is a structural issue, one that has haunted the Windsor dynasty for nearly a century. In fact, since the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936. This persistent, uncanny problem being, how can someone be half in and half out of the British royal family? This is demonstrated very clearly by the fact that half of the princes in this photograph, that's right, half, are neither completely in nor completely out of the firm. William and Edward are in. Andy and Harry, albeit for very different reasons, are neither in nor out. In a nutshell, this is the issue. The core Windsor clan is in fact 3 separate things at the same time. First, they're a family, one made up of mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, cousins, aunts and uncles, with each unique connection having its own distinct dynamic. Second, they're a firm, a business collective with vast financial, real estate, investment and land holdings. Third, they are a legally framed constitutional institution. So what happens when the interests of the family directly conflict with the interests of the realm? The answer for Andrew, by the time this picture was taken, was that his mother had chosen family unequivocally. And as Queen Elizabeth was also the boss of the firm, her word was law. Andrew would not be banished, not as long as she was alive. And you can see her point of view with great sympathy. How could she possibly forbid her second-born son from attending his own father's funeral? Despite accusations of having sex with a 17-year-old, despite his known association with a convicted sex trafficker, despite his recent self-immolating interview, Mummy chose Andy. As painful as it is to reflect upon now, Queen Elizabeth clearly did everything she could while she was alive to protect Andrew's position within the firm, long after his reputational sell-by date had expired. Indeed, this is why, perhaps inevitably, there will always be controversy surrounding the royal family, because sometimes a mother will choose her son over the perceived reputation of the realm, just as sometimes a brother will choose his wife over fealty to the institution. Hence, half of the princes in this image are half out of the firm. One an outcast, protected by the Queen. One a renegade who chose love over duty, just like his great-great-uncle Edward VIII. So by April 21, when you look at this picture, it's difficult not to look at Andrew and see 2 very distinct emotions on his face. First, the grief of a mourning son. Second, the resolute bullishness of a man who knows, as long as the Queen has his back, he's going nowhere. However, the past was beginning to catch up with Andrew in other ways. That's because 4 months after the funeral of Prince Philip, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil suit in New York in August 2021, alleging, among other things, that Andrew had sexually abused Miss Giuffre, then known as Virginia Roberts, in London, Miami, and on Epstein's private island in the Caribbean. Giuffre also claimed Andrew knew she was just 17 years old when they first had sex, with the official filing going on to state, 20 years ago, Prince Andrew's wealth, power, position and connections enabled him to abuse a frightened, vulnerable child, with no one there to protect her. It is long past the time for him to be held to account. While it's impossible to say if Andrew's Newsnight interview from 2019 directly provoked Giuffre's civil suit, we do know that in her memoir Nobody's Girl, published in 2025, that she referred to the interview as jet fuel for her legal team. He had essentially offered a free-to-air, voluntary deposition for her lawyers to pick apart at their convenience. Frankly, if the prince had even an iota of common sense, he would have adhered to the well-worn legal maxim, if you can't tell the truth, shut your mouth. Making matters even more astonishing is the fact that the Windsor family has had an unofficial motto going back to the 1930s: never complain, never explain. By choosing to, quote-unquote, explain his position, Andrew had broken a rule expounded upon by the journalist Walter Bagehot, who wrote in 1867, "Above all things, our royalty is to be reverenced. If you begin to poke about it, you cannot reverence it. Its mystery is its life. We must not let in daylight upon magic." By letting the daylight in, Andrew had lit a fuse that led to the explosive possibility of a British prince being subpoenaed to give evidence in a US court on the matter of his allegedly having sex with a trafficked 17-year-old. Given the Duke's abject performance in his Newsnight interview, putting him in the dock to face a hostile cross-examination was an appalling prospect. To this end, his legal team took the rather distasteful approach of trying to have the case dismissed in part on a technicality concerning the terms of Giuffre's 2009 Epstein suit, which had been settled out of court. However, in early 2022, Judge Lewis A. Kaplan denied the Prince's motion to have the case dismissed, noting, as he did so, defendant's assertion that he cannot reasonably prepare a response to plaintiff's allegations plainly contradicts the content of his moving papers, meaning specific documents filed by Andrew, in which he denies Miss Giuffre's allegations in no uncertain terms. With the judge calling BS on Andrew's pre-trial submissions and a date now in the calendar, March the 10th, 2025, for Andrew to give a deposition under oath, the time had come to raise the white flag, which meant Andrew paying a reported $12 million settlement to Miss Giuffre, along with a separate payment to her charity, as well as issuing a statement in which he accepted no liability and said, "Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character, and he accepts that she has suffered, both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks." Prince Andrew commends the bravery of Miss Giuffre and other survivors in standing up for themselves and others. To my mind, a more facile, ineffective statement would be difficult to imagine. How could Andrew not think it utterly bizarre to congratulate an abuse victim for standing up for themselves, when the person they were clearly standing up to was Andrew himself? Apart from the abject idiocy of what he did say, here we had yet another example of Andrew being offered the opportunity to show even an ounce of genuine remorse and failing miserably. The man who once risibly described himself as too honourable was proving yet again to be anything but. It should be noted that at this point, Andrew had taken the same approach as his old friends, convicted sex traffickers Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. All three had now been sued by Virginia Giuffre in 2021, 2015 and 2009 respectively, with all three choosing to settle rather than face impossible questions in the dock. In the eyes of public opinion, Andrew had been given the opportunity to fight for his honour, then, on the eve of battle, capitulated. In so doing, the Duke had somehow managed to discover a reputational realm beneath national disgrace. However, yet again, the old pattern repeated. Andrew continued to retain the support of the Queen, and as long as he did so, he retained the military rank of Vice Admiral. He retained the title of Duke of York. He retained his Royal Lodge mansion, which he shared with his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson. He retained the Order of the Garter. He kept his princehood, and he remained a Councillor of State, meaning that he could temporarily step in for the monarch if circumstances demanded. Basically, as long as the Queen backed Andrew, the manifest and utter contempt of the British public simply didn't matter. Which brings me to the next two pictures I want to explore more carefully. The first was taken on September the 19th, 2022, which captured the expressions of Prince Andrew and his daughter Princess Beatrice as they observed the transfer of the Queen's coffin into the state hearse at Wellington Arch in London. And again, like in the previous image, it is easy to see two distinct emotions on Andrew's face. First, the grief of a mourning son. Second, a profound, deep and sudden concern that the one person who has protected him through hell and high water can no longer shield him. Andrew, who kept all his titles and possessions despite settling his case with Virginia Giuffre barely 7 months previously, is now wholly at the mercy of his brother, King Charles III. But would the new monarch be as forgiving as the old? I believe this image suggests that very question is already troubling the Duke. Then there's this photograph, taken on Christmas Day 2022. It shows Andrew 3 months after his mother's funeral, attending a service at St Mary's Magdalene Church in Sandringham. On the face of it, it's a typical scene. Hardcore royal supporters devoting their Christmas morning to travel to Norfolk, East Anglia, to wish the royal family a happy festive holiday. Nothing unusual in that. Until, that is, we zoom into the man in the black and blue hat. And just wow, what a story his expression tells. I'm going to call it. This is a die-hard monarchist, he wouldn't be at Sandringham otherwise, who clearly despises the bones of the Duke of York. And if you look more closely, see how he's lowered his camera, as if he doesn't want the memory card to be contaminated by the likeness of the prince. And while of course I can't be certain what this gentleman is feeling, I think his face perfectly reflects where dyed-in-the-wool royalists now were when it came to Andrew. He was effectively an open wound on the body of the institution they adored, not least because, to anti-monarchists, Andrew's protector status within the firm was now an argument for abolition that was impossible to dismiss. Prince Andrew had become the poster boy for revolution. The slow creep that had been building for the past 11 years was beginning to feel like an inflection point that was both imminent and necessary. It was simply no longer possible to continually kick the Andrew problem into the long grass. And if that reckoning was truly coming, it could mean only one thing: no more half-in, half-out status for the Duke of York. He was either going to be all the way in or all the way out. This long-standing issue is, I believe, very well illustrated by the next two images I want to interrogate, both taken on the same day, May the 6th, 2023, on the occasion of the coronation of King Charles III. The first photograph shows a rather glum, disconsolate-looking Prince Andrew leaving Westminster Abbey after the official ceremony. He's wearing what I believe to be a statement outfit, being the robes of the most noble Order of the Garter. This is Andrew saying to the entire world, I'm still at the very heart of the firm, deal with it. Nonetheless, at this moment, Andrew knows something that many observers do not, something perfectly illustrated by this next image. Taken on the balcony of Buckingham Palace after the processional return from Westminster Abbey, we see the royal family acknowledging the tens of thousands of well-wishers who thronged the Mall that day. If we zoom in to the right, we can see Charles's son and daughter-in-law William and Catherine, and his siblings Anne and Edward. But no Andrew. That's right, on the day of his coronation, the king has banished his brother. And why? Because at best his appearance would draw negative headlines. At worst, the unimaginable scenes of Andrew being booed off the balcony. It was an absolute no-brainer. Andrew was toxic, and without the Queen protecting his position within the firm, he was out of the picture, literally. So just going back to the previous image for a moment, knowing what was to come, does this not now look like the expression of the boy who knows he's not going to be on the balcony? Absolutely it does. Charles is in charge, and given what was to transpire, this was just a taste of what was to come. The following months were more bizarre than battle-scarred for Andrew, with fewer revelations about his conduct. But there were two movies released concerning his car crash Newsnight interview. First came Netflix Scoop in April 2024, then Amazon's A Very Royal Scandal in September of the same year. Two movies about what an abject, unrepentant arse you've been, released in the same year. I mean, we've all been there. Meanwhile, perhaps to prove his versatility, The Duke found himself embroiled in a spying scandal after it was revealed that an alleged Chinese agent had formed, and I quote, an unusual degree of trust with Andrew. The Prince promised that he had ceased all contact with the individual once the government warned him that H6, as he was known within the security community, was likely a spy for Communist China. However, Andrew's claim that he had ceased all contact with the foreign agent was about to come into sharp, retrospective relief. That's because in January 2025, emails from Prince Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein were published in a court document. The case concerned an appeal by the banker Jess Staley against a decision by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority that banned Staley from senior positions in the industry for failing to fully disclose his relationship with Epstein. In one of the published emails, Andrew writes to Epstein, "Keep in close touch and we'll play some more soon," with 4 exclamation marks. Beyond the implied disgusting nature of the email, there was an additional problem for Andrew. This correspondence was sent in February 2011. This, despite Andrew's claims in his Newsnight interview about his meeting with Epstein in 2010, and I quote, "I said, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And I left. I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward." Let me just repeat that last part. To this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward. However, the February 2011 "Play Some More Soon" email proved Andrew remained in contact with Jeffrey Epstein beyond December 2010. Therefore, when he said to Mateless he had no contact with Epstein from that day forward, it was a blatant lie. Furthermore, we also had definitive proof that Andrew not only did have contact, but clearly wanted to consort with Epstein again after he claimed he broke off their friendship, that he wanted to keep in close touch and play some more soon. This is the plain truth. If those emails were in fact from the Duke, which he has never denied sending, on the subject of his contact timeline with Epstein, Andrew was now a proven liar. That meant an asterisk would now have to be put on everything Andrew ever said about Virginia Giuffre, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. From the moment these emails were published in January 2025, as far as Virginia Giuffre's version of events versus Andrew's, I absolutely believed Giuffre's account of what happened in 2001. Whatever the Duke's denials, however many times he made them, and no matter how vociferously, I simply no longer believed him. Tragically, just 3 months later, Virginia Giuffre died at her home in Near Gabby, Western Australia, aged 41. She had taken her own life. Which brings me to this image. Taken in March 2023, 2 years before she died, it shows Virginia Roberts Giuffre holding a photograph of herself as a teenager when she claimed she was trafficked and abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and abused by Prince Andrew. In the context of this story, stretching from 2001 to 2025, I honestly can't think of a more poignant, heartbreaking image. The continuing pain and trauma, clearly etched on the face of Miss Giuffre, is in such stark contrast to the face of the bright-eyed young girl with a world of possibilities ahead of her. But sadly, her fate was to fall into the hands of Epstein and Maxwell, who would traffic her around the globe to be abused by powerful men she didn't know, men who would haunt her life for the rest of her life. It should truly never be forgotten that the people at the centre of this story were the blameless, innocent victims of pure evil. And I think this picture tells this story more eloquently than I ever could. Then, 4 months after Virginia's death, 2 books would come to define the moment when the slow creep of crisis accelerated to full catastrophe for Andrew. The first was Andrew Loney's peerless, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, which blew the lid on every aspect of Andrew's life, from accusations of Andrew being a sex addict, an inveterate bully and serial cheat, to the claim that Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had stayed in contact with Jeffrey Epstein after they had both claimed they had cut all ties. Entitled was basically a bomb going off under the House of York. In an episode of Palace Authorised, Andrew Loney told my colleague Joe Elvin that in Epstein's infamous Black Book, he had 18 different phone numbers for Sarah Ferguson, 2 more than he had for Andrew, and that they had both flown on the Lolita Express, being Epstein's private plane, so nicknamed in reference to Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel Lolita, about a paedophile's pursuit of a 12-year-old girl. Loney also claimed he was told Epstein might have given Sarah Ferguson £2 million, contradicting her previously insisting it was only £15,000. As if this wasn't bad enough, the second book I mentioned, which was announced in August to be published in October 2025, was Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl. This clearly landed at the Palace as a countdown to disaster, which leads me to this photograph. Taken on the 16th of September 2025, it shows Prince Andrew attempting to strike up a conversation with the future king on the steps of Westminster Cathedral after the Requiem Mass for Catherine, Duchess of Kent. Clearly, William is aghast. If you zoom in here, his pained expression is immutable. It's impossible to not imagine him contemplating the optics, knowing there are cameras everywhere. If he speaks to the Duke, headlines. If he turns his back and walks away, headlines. His only choice is to stand there, looking trapped, embarrassed and revolted. Surely in this moment he is thinking, something has to be done about this generational Jonah. This simply cannot keep happening every time the eyes of the world are upon us. Andrew, meanwhile, is clearly oblivious to the contempt carved on the face of the Prince of Wales. Proof, if proof were needed, that Andrew and reality were never quite on speaking terms. However, reality was about to bite, and the Duke would soon know that vile actions can indeed lead to dire consequences. That's because 1 month later, on the 15th of October 2025, a British newspaper began serialising Virginia Giuffre's memoirs, and her words from the grave were utterly devastating. In one horrifying line, she described the Duke thus: "Prince Andrew believed having sex with me was his birthright." Then, in perhaps the most harrowing extract, she described Andrew's arriving at Ghislaine Maxwell's Belgravia townhouse in 2001, shortly before she claimed Andrew had sex with her. When Prince Andrew arrived at the house that evening, Maxwell was more coquettish than usual. "Guess Jenna's age," she urged the prince, meaning Virginia's age. The Duke of York, who was then 41, guessed correctly, 17. "My daughters are just a little younger than you," he told me, explaining his accuracy. As usual, Maxwell was quick with a joke. "I guess we will have to trade her in soon." Coming off the back of the late September scandal, when Sarah Ferguson's emails to Jeffrey Epstein were published in the Mail on Sunday, proving she was communicating with the sex trafficker after she had claimed in a newspaper interview that she had broken off all contact with him, in which she referred to him as a steadfast, generous and supreme friend to me and my family. We therefore now had the unedifying spectacle of a British Duke and Duchess, both involved in separate scandals, with the same paedophile at the same time. The House of York was essentially imploding in real time before our very eyes. For this reason, on the 16th of October, on Palace Confidential, I demanded that the King remove all of Andrew's conferred titles. Duke of York, gone. Order of the Garter, stripped. Councillor of State, rescinded. The following day, Andrew announced that he would voluntarily give up several of his extant titles, including the Duke of York. Then 2 days later, on October the 19th, the Mail on Sunday published even more shocking allegations. It was reported that shortly before the publication, in 2011, of the now infamous photograph of Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre in Ghislaine Maxwell's London home that the Duke had supplied his personal protection officer with Giuffre's date of birth and American Social Security number, implicitly providing that officer with the means to dig up dirt on the then 28-year-old Virginia Giuffre. There is no suggestion that his protection officer complied with the Duke's request, but here we had the Duke, a man eighth in line to the throne no less, apparently asking his taxpayer-funded personal bodyguard to act as his private detective in a bid to smear a victim of sex trafficking. At this point in time, Andrew must have looked back at the slow, humiliating creep phase of his downfall as a veritable paradise, because by October 2025, it was Armageddon. The day after the digging for dirt allegations were made, on an episode of Palace Reacts, I demanded for the first time that the king must now act and issue letters patent and strip Andrew of his princehood. 10 days later, on the 30th of October 2025, King Charles announced exactly that. He would follow the punishment and the process I prescribed. Via letters patent, the king was set to de-prince his own brother. 6 days later, on the 5th of November 2025, the London Gazette included a notice which stated that the king has been pleased by letters patent under the Great Seal of the realm to declare that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor shall no longer be entitled to hold and enjoy the style, title or attribute of Royal Highness and the titular dignity of Prince. On the 1st of December, additional titles including Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order and the Most Noble Order of the Garter were also officially stripped. As part of a parallel process, Sarah Ferguson also had all her titles removed, and it was subsequently announced that both Fergie and Andy will be essentially evicted from their 30-room mansion, Royal Lodge. In a bitter, sickening twist, on the 13th of November, 14 days after the king finally took decisive action, private emails sent by Jeffrey Epstein seemed to confirm that the 2001 photograph showing Andrew with his hand around a 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre's waist was in fact genuine. In his 2019 Newsnight interview, the then prince had said, "Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken." Turns out there was never any need for Andrew to worry. Jeffrey remembered. I began this episode by stating that in less than 40 years, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, through a mix of mendacity and hypocrisy, idiocy and arrogance, had brought down the House of York, an institution created for them by Queen Elizabeth, one gifted to them on their wedding day in 1986. I also asked if the sins of the parents had already doomed their two daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, and I think this final image goes some way to answering that question. Taken on the 12th of December 2025, it shows a blacked-out Range Rover, believed to be transporting Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to the christening of his granddaughter Athena, daughter of Princess Beatrice. Andrew is now held to be so morally reprehensible that he cannot even show his face in public on the occasion of his granddaughter's christening. The man, eighth in line to the British crown, for he is still that, had to be spirited to the chapel in a blacked-out SUV, like a mafia capo on his way to trial. Compare that to this, the last image I want to explore, taken on July the 23rd, 1986, on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. It shows Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew, both 26 years old, playfully encouraging the tens of thousands of adoring well-wishers, including me at the time, I hasten to add, who turned out to celebrate their nuptials, to cheer louder. This is what they had, but it wasn't enough. And because they chased more, so recklessly and cruelly, they lost it all. Now, let's look at those images side by side. The fall of the House of York, illustrated perfectly, tragically. Some might say, given Andrew's inveterate character, inescapably so. While I believe there is now no sane, viable way back for Fergie or Andrew, there is still a chance for their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. who should not be punished for the perfidy of their parents. Indeed, recent exclusive reporting in the Mail on Sunday suggests that Princess Eugenie, who established the Anti-Slavery Collective to help counter sex trafficking, may have already cut off all contact with her father due to his refusal to apologise to Epstein's victims. Her mother, of course, exists on a different plane, and I will be exploring that relationship more closely in a forthcoming episode of Reading the Royals, so watch out for that. One final thought. When I called for the King to use letters patent to de-Prince Andrew, several Conservative commentators disagreed with me. They insisted that parliamentary time would be required to do such a thing, and that meant the entire enterprise simply wasn't practicable. I suspected at the time that part of their hesitancy came from the fact that they didn't want the process to be seen to be relatively straightforward. After all, if it's simple for the monarch to strip titles from members of the royal family, what will happen when a future king or queen comes under extreme pressure to boot out the next dodgy duke or plotting prince? The truth is, my Conservative friends were not wrong. Andrew's true legacy, if he has one, was to make the entire institution a little bit more fragile, more vulnerable. Because of Andrew, we have now seen how easy it is to defenestrate a member of the firm, and for that reason, it will be demanded again at some point. Of that, I have no doubt. Andrew let the daylight in, and because the palace refused to act when it should have, over a decade ago, we have indeed lost some of the magic, meaning real moral strength and fortitude are now needed more than ever to preserve our beloved monarchy long into the future, lest the same mistakes are made again. If you enjoyed this episode of Reading the Royals, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, why not subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel to help us continue to bring you the latest, most fascinating, most compelling royal content. I'm Richard Eden. Goodbye. I now have two absolute demands concerning Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. One, Andrew absolutely must now volunteer a full account of all his dealings with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The fact that he hasn't done this already is a national disgrace. Two, the Metropolitan Police need, as a matter of absolute urgency, to reopen their investigation into Andrew's purported conduct in 2011, when it is alleged that he asked his taxpayer-funded Met Police protection officer to conduct background checks on Virginia Giuffre, the woman who claimed she was trafficked to London to have sex with Andrew in 2001. I'm demanding this step to be taken as I believe it to be the most likely path for legal consequences for the ex-prince, regardless of his denial of wrongdoing. And in my view, it is long past time for Andrew to be brought to account, if in fact he has broken any laws. This investigation should also cover the new allegations concerning a woman sent to Andrew by Epstein in 2010, who claims she spent the night in a royal residence, Royal Lodge, the property that Andrew shared with his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson since 2008, and from which they have now essentially been evicted. The context of these demands is that on the 30th of January, millions of new files relating to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein were released by the American Department of Justice. While the release is the largest to date, containing 3 million pages and including 180,000 images and 2,000 videos, it almost certainly won't be the last. Tragically, some would say unsurprisingly, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is mentioned in a tranche of fresh emails included in the release. There are also photographs where he is allegedly seen on all fours and appearing to touch the abdomen of a young woman who is lying on the floor. If these images are genuine, they are made all the more baffling and creepy by the fact that in one of them, Andrew is looking directly at the camera. What on earth is he doing? What was the purpose of the pictures that he knows are being captured for posterity? When did this happen? Where is he and who is he with? These are just some of the questions he must now answer. It is important to say, however, that being included in the files does not implicate Andrew in Epstein's criminality, and that the ex-prince has strenuously denied any wrongdoing. First then, let's talk about my number one demand. Andrew must come clean. In an official statement in February 2022, as part of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's undisclosed civil settlement with Mrs. Giuffre, rumoured to be worth $12 million, the ex-prince pledged to, and I quote, demonstrate his regret for his association with Epstein by supporting the fight against the evils of sex trafficking and by supporting its victims. Let me say that again. He pledged to fight against the evils of sex trafficking and support its victims. Well, almost 4 years have passed, and what has Andrew Mountbatten Windsor done about that promise? As far as I can tell, absolutely nothing. Well, Andrew, I'll tell you what you can do. If you care at all about the evils of sex trafficking, talk. If you wish to support victims, talk. What are you waiting for? Creating a sworn, voluntary affidavit doesn't require your travelling to the US to appear before the US Congress, as suggested by the British Prime Minister. A sworn, voluntary affidavit can be written today. You can start right now. Again, I ask, what are you waiting for? You have to know that anything you might say, no matter how inconsequential it appears to you, about your extensive contact with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, might help to bring peace to his dozens of victims. If you care even an iota for the victims of his appalling evil crimes, talk. Nothing else will satisfy honour. What possible cause could you have for not now compiling a full and complete account of your known 12 years of contact with Jeffrey Epstein? If your 4 years of silence, since you stated you wanted to support victims of sexual trafficking, is what I imagine it to be, namely an attempt to protect your reputation, I have news for you, mate. You don't have a reputation to protect. If you care at all for the victims, if you care a jot for your own family, for the reputation of the monarchy, if you ever meant a single word you ever said about service and sacrifice, you will volunteer to tell the world everything. And you will do it now. You have no decent excuse not to. Meaning if you don't immediately come clean, under oath, it is tantamount to declaring you don't care at all about the victims. And if you don't care, be a man, own it. Say you don't care. Say that your promise from 2022 was a cynical carapace, an attempt to shield yourself from accusations of naked hypocrisy and deceit. Or you can, as decency demands, and talk. Besides, your silence is not protecting you. In fact, it's because of your silence, in light of the recent revelations, that I now believe the only thing you said in your infamous Newsnight interview in 2019 that was true was that you didn't regret being friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who, for the avoidance of doubt, admitted in 2008 to soliciting sex from a 14-year-old girl in Florida and was subsequently sentenced to 18 months in jail. And in 2019, you told Newsnight you didn't regret being friends with that guy? Really? I'm now calling it. As far as I'm concerned, everything else you said in that interview was a pack of lies. I believe Giuffre. I stand with Giuffre and all the other victims. And to Andrew, I say directly, I simply do not believe a word you said. Now to my second demand, that the Metropolitan Police formally reopen its investigations surrounding Andrew's conduct in 2011. These are the facts. In 2025, the Mail on Sunday reported on an alleged 2011 email from Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to Ed Perkins, then Queen Elizabeth's Deputy Press Secretary. In it, he wrote, and I quote, "It would also seem she," meaning Virginia Giuffre, "has a criminal record in the States. I have given her DOB, meaning date of birth, and social security number for investigation with, name redacted, the on-duty PPO, meaning Personal Protection Officer. While it should be stated that there is no evidence that any serving PPO actually followed up on the alleged request, it is clear what Andrew's apparent intent was, to dig for dirt on Giuffre, so she could be discredited in public. Whether or not a PPO actually actioned any investigation into Giuffre, if Andrew did indeed make such a request, is immaterial. The request on its own offers potential grounds for legal action, both in Britain and the US. To that point, Di Davies, the Met's former head of Royal Protection, told the Mail on Sunday, and I quote, "Asking a police officer to investigate an alleged victim is outside of their duties, whether that is calling the FBI, your mates in the US, or searching out themselves. That is, in my view, a criminal offence. Di went on to urge authorities to question Andrew under caution, to attempt to ascertain if there is any evidence he abetted an officer to commit the criminal offence of misconduct in public office, adding, and I quote, "It is time for Scotland Yard to launch a full criminal investigation into Prince Andrew." Furthermore, in the United States, under the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, it is an offence to knowingly use, transfer or possess another person's social security number with the intent to commit an illegal act. Spencer Couvin, who represented 9 Epstein victims, told The Telegraph, and I quote, "Penalties for this crime are very severe and can be up to 15 years in prison." That is why I'm now demanding of the Metropolitan Police that they investigate Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It should be done now. He should be questioned under caution, his rights read, and his statement taken under oath. The idea that public resources might have been used to blacken the name of a victim of sexual exploitation is abhorrent. Not only does it demand the urgent attention of the police, but it also needs to be seen to be investigated. Many survivors of the most appalling abuse feel unsafe coming forward to the authorities. And we cannot have a situation where even the suspicion exists that elite members of society have the power to have victims targeted for investigation by serving police officers. That is how justice fails and perpetrators walk free to abuse again. I mean, how hard can this matter be to investigate? Talk to Ed Perkins, the man who allegedly received the email. Get the PPO logs from the Palace and Royal Lodge. Talk to the officers. Question Andrew under caution. Why am I even explaining this to you? You're the police. Do your job. Furthermore, as time passes and more revelations emerge, none of which have been seriously investigated, the King looks weaker and weaker. If reports are to be believed, it was only under pressure from Prince William and Queen Camilla that Charles acted to de-prince Prince Andrew in the first place. That puts us in a position where the stripping of Andrew's titles looks more and more, every day, like a slap on the wrist. And this is what's so galling. Practically every day we see Andrew riding horses around Windsor Great Park. Who pays for that? Andrew's new home. Who pays for that? Andrew's allowances. Who pays for that? No, enough is enough. And this is my third demand. Cut him off. The time has come. Absolutely and entirely. Cut him off. If Andrew Mountbatten Windsor won't act to protect victims, why should we protect him? Why should he have anything from the Crown or public purse? Why? Therefore, King Charles, this is my demand of you. Cut Andrew off. Because if there's a single solitary penny of taxpayers' money going to that man, it is more than he could ever deserve, and more than the British people could ever stomach. Those, therefore, are my 3 demands. 1, Andrew needs to give a voluntary statement under oath. 2, the police must investigate the ex-Duke's alleged conduct in 2011. 3, King Charles, cut him off. The time has come. Nothing else will do. We'll be discussing these and other issues surrounding the disgraced Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in this week's Palace Confidential, including whether the House of York should be formally dissolved through an Act of Parliament to prevent Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from ever using the title, which according to many experts, he still can. So watch out for that this coming Thursday. Thanks for watching. I'm Richard Eden. Goodbye.
I think it's very important that the Met show exactly what they've done in terms of their investigations. Have they contacted Andrew? He's a great hoarder, he's got lots of material. Have his lawyers been approached? And of course, there are other victims who have come forward. I mean, many people presented evidence, including Virginia Giuffre, over the years. I think we really need to see a sense of this being looked at properly to avoid the conclusion that this is just another classic British cover-up. There's no appetite, it seems, in the British establishment to actually hold Andrew to account. And I think that's very worrying. The royal family clearly do not want him to be in the dock, shades of the Paul Burrell trial and how it was shut down. I think what's also worrying is stories that there's been some cosy arrangement to allow Andrew to go and live in Bahrain outside the reach of the law. I really do feel that he should face justice. I mean, people are being sent to prison for tweets, and there's plenty of evidence of his financial and sexual misdemeanors. And I think, it is time now for the royal family to get a grip on this situation, for the police and the legal authorities to actually accept that even if he's a member of the royal family, he has to face justice in the way, for example, the son of the Crown Princess of Norway is. I used to think that Andrew might see the inside of a courtroom. I'm not so sure now. I think everyone is determined that he doesn't, that if charges are levelled at him, he will, like King Juan Carlos of Spain, disappear to the Middle East. I didn't think there's an extradition treaty between Bahrain and London, for example. So I don't think he will face justice. And I think, that is an outrage, really, for the victims and for the rule of law. I mean, clearly this is a matter for legal enforcement and the police, and the palace can't interfere. But I think what worries me is the palace are interfering, which is why the legal authorities and the police are doing nothing. So I think a great deal of transparency there would be helpful to actually know, perhaps through parliamentary questions, actually what communication is going on between the palace and law enforcement. I think it's too late for Andrew to recover his reputation. I don't think he's particularly concerned about it. I think he still feels he's been hard done by. And he's had plenty of opportunities over the years to show some contrition, to try and redeem himself through good works, and he's chosen not to do so. I think this is a problem of the palace's own making. They should have dealt with this years ago. They knew about it. I understand they had a copy of Giuffre's book even before she died. And they knew what was coming up. And it's the same old story, too little, too late, hope the problem goes away, a bit of window dressing, and the peasants will be satisfied. I think this is a problem for the whole royal family. Clearly, Charles inherited the problem from his mother. I think he was aware of it. I mean, he was one who warned against Andrew being given the trade envoy job in the first place because he knew what would happen. But the fact is that Andrew has been enabled and protected by a whole succession of diplomats, civil servants, politicians, courtiers, and others. And even at the Duchess of Kent's funeral, he was given a police escort, even though he's not a working royal. So the system is there. I talked to a member of the royal household recently, and it seems that both Andrew and Sarah Ferguson are still holding meetings at Buckingham Palace, still meeting business contacts, still taking their washing in to be done. And so we're getting one version for the public and actually a different reality. I think the real damage that Andrew will feel is the loss of his status. Status was his whole sense of identity. He described himself first as a prince, then as a naval officer, then as a husband. And I think losing the garter, losing the fact he can call himself a vice admiral, that he can go on the balcony at Buckingham Palace, those things that really count for him, because that's what's shaped his whole life. Losing his reputation, having fractured family relationships seem to be less important. But that's gone, I don't think, for all of them. Of course, there are now wider questions about royal accountability and privilege, which is what worries them. And so if they'd dealt with this problem much earlier, we wouldn't have this sort of snowballing of concern about the way the royals operate. I think William realises this. I think he wants the stables clean before he inherits. And it's really up to Charles to bite the bullet and to see that, for example, I think that only those in direct line of succession have titles, that there's a royal register so that people like Beatrice and Eugenie can't swan off to the Middle East and do business there, that there is far more parliamentary scrutiny, and we have royal wills unsealed, so we know how the money is passed on from generation to generation. Well, we know that the eviction from Royal Lodge is not going as smoothly as everyone was saying, that he can stay there till October, and I suspect he will dig his heels in as long as he can. It's a big place to leave. But I think also he doesn't want to leave. This is all about an arrangement. He's been paid to leave. I'm not sure he's going to a house which is, shall we say, a shoebox. And he's going to continue to have staff. Nothing much is changing in his life, except he's being paid quite a lot of money to change the optics. Well, everyone is looking to see what happens at Christmas and who goes where. Andrew, I think, will feel a little cheesed off, that, like last year, that he's not allowed to join everyone. He lacks a complete sense of self-awareness. You would think he would want to keep his distance, seeing the reaction he got at the Duchess of Kent's funeral. There was, of course, a long period where Sarah Ferguson spent Christmas Day at Wood Farm, often with her own family members, and then the Queen would come down afterwards and see her, and she would join activities at other parts of the festive season. So they're not, as a family, it's not a situation they haven't known before. And of course, there are plenty of options for Andrew. I mean, he can have a riotous party at Royal Lodge with his wife, with his friends, with his children. I mean, and that, of course, is the big question. Where will Beatrice and Eugenie go? Will they side with the royal family, which is where their bread's buttered? Will they show some family loyalty, given, of course, the strained relations, particularly with their father? Or will they, as I suspect, basically kind of cut themselves loose and just do something with their in-laws or their own families quite separately? That would be the sensible thing. Lie low, hope the problem goes, and then perhaps go quietly to other royal events later in the year. I think the big concern must be what is going to happen to Sarah Ferguson. She's been used to being subsidised and supported by the royal family for years. She's a woman who has a very extravagant standard of living and does not want to change that. I think a lot of the people who lent her money in the past are no longer going to do that. The interesting question is what's happened to the £4 million from the Belgravia sale of the house recently. But I think the feeling in the royal family is that she needs to still be kept close to avoid her selling family secrets. And of course, she's constantly threatened to do this over the years. At the time of her divorce, and more recently, of course, this is all part of her negotiating tactics. Which I think are pretty short term, because of course the royal family can put pressure on the Yorks through the daughters. They can take away the titles, they can make life very difficult for them, they can exclude them from the family. And I think that's the pressure that I think will prevent the Yorks from doing anything too dramatic. That doesn't mean that there won't be stories leaked to the press, just little shots across people's bows. My own advice to Beatrice and Eugenie is they should concentrate on their careers and their families and their charitable activities. I think they should no longer get involved with supporting Saudi banks and various other things that they're doing. Their jobs, which rely on client relations, which come from, frankly, their status, I think it's going to be difficult for them. They too have a very high standard of living, which has been sustained by monetising their position in the royal family. But I think if they want to have a long-term future within the family, then I think they will have to stop some things that they're doing. They've refused to allow them to be audited. If there was a royal register, at least some of the stuff could be registered so we would know what they were doing. But I do think there are various skeletons in those cupboards that will emerge in the course of 2026. I think what was very interesting is the losing letters patent. I mean, being struck from the peerage. Because clearly that can be done to anyone, whether it's Prince Harry and his children, or the York children, or others who carry titles. I do think it seems strange in this sort of modern world to have these titles for people, particularly if they're non-working royals. So this is again a shot across the bows for Harry and Montecito that if York can lose his title, so can Sussex. And I suspect that William will want to do that when he comes to power, whenever that is. I'm suing Simon & Schuster in the US for the simple reason that they broke the terms of their own contract and indeed their own termination clause. The book was commissioned on a full manuscript in February. It was also commissioned in this country by Collins. Collins did basically the editorial work on it. The difference between the script that was submitted and the script that was published was about 1%. Most of those were legal changes. So it was really just a copy editing job. Simon & Schuster, I think, realised that they couldn't publish in time for the UK edition in August, though they did indeed advertise the book for August. And rather than just offset their edition from the British edition, they thought, individual in Britain, we can do what we want. I'm afraid this is part of a long series of books that Simon & Schuster have cancelled on a whim. And they thought that I would go away. The problem is that I'm a literary agent, have been for 40 years. I know how contracts work. They didn't go through the contractual obligations of giving me time to correct whatever they wanted me to do. And this was very, very damaging to me. I was forced, with only a few weeks before publication, to self-publish. I had no bookshop distribution. I had no marketing spend. And of course, I had no credibility, really, from a major American publisher. So while the book went to #1 here and spent 6 weeks in the bestseller list, it languishes at 12,000th in the Amazon list. I've lost a lot of money and my reputation, and I think Simon Schuster should have to pay for it. I also think it's very important that authors stand up to corporate publishing who feel they can behave like this and get away with it. Last week, I lodged a complaint in the court in New York, which anyone can see. There's been no response from Simon Schuster. They have 30 days to respond. I mean, there's been negotiations going on for 6 months now. They've been given every opportunity to come to some sort of settlement with me. They've played this as long as they can in the hope that they could just push up my legal expenses and done nothing. So the classic sort of slap sort of mentality. And I think this needs to be called out. And I hope that there will be other authors who've also suffered at the hands of this publisher who will speak out, and that authors in future will perhaps consider whether Simon & Schuster is the place to send their books. Well, there are lots of rumours there's been pressure from the royal family and Trump. I think the reason is that they didn't get their act together, and they've just tried to cover up their own mistakes. There's maybe a concern that they were up for sale and they were worried about what was in the book and it might upset someone who might buy them. That's one theory. But I just think that it's just a bunch of executives who sort of lost interest in a book and thought they could wash their hands of it, even though they'd signed a contract. I think if the case goes to court, I will certainly clearly be giving evidence. I've just returned from a week in the States where I've been doing publicity about Entitled, and it's clearly a huge subject, particularly the Epstein material, which I'm constantly getting new information on. So this is a running story in the States. Virginia Giuffre's book was a #1 New York Times bestseller. And there's no reason my book shouldn't also be in the bestseller list in the States. And I'm hoping with the paperback coming out in the summer, which will be distributed by HarperCollins, that there will be copies in bookshops and American readers will be able to get hold of the new updated version. The edition that Westminster Press published is available on Amazon. There's also an audio book from Blackstone for those who prefer to listen to it. And there will be, come May, a new, slightly updated version coming from HarperCollins.
Did Prince Andrew's father have an affair with Sarah Ferguson's mother? Why was Prince Andrew ordered off HMS Broadsword? Did the Argentines plot to kill Prince Andrew on the island of Mystique? And what is the truth about Jeffrey Epstein and Fergie? Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Palace Confidential, where I'm joined by the esteemed royal biographer Andrew Loney, whose 2015 book Stalin's Englishman, The Lives of Guy Burgess was named Book of the Year by The Guardian, Best Biography of the Year by The Times, and Biography of the Year by The Mail on Sunday. He's also written biographies on the Mountbattens and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. He's here today to talk about his latest book, recently serialised in the Daily Mail, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Andrew, thank you for being here today. You're very welcome. Now, if you haven't already, yes, please do consider subscribing to the Daily Mail Royals channel. It's free and it will make sure you are up to date on all of our exclusive content. If you want the Palace Confidential newsletter to be sent directly to your inbox every Thursday, you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. So I feel like I have to ask this right away because we teased it at the beginning, but Prince Philip, the late Queen's husband, and Sarah Ferguson's mother, what happened there?
Well, they had an affair. The affair, I think, began in the 1960s. It continued. I mean, they certainly remained very close friends. He was actually staying with Susan Barrantes, as I understand, in November '92 when the fire at Windsor took place, which was, of course, his wedding anniversary. But I have it on pretty good authority that, they were lovers. It was well known in their circles.
Wow. Well, I'm sure a lot of people have very distinct opinions on Prince Andrew, especially after learning about his connections to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, which we'll have more on that later. But let's go back to, you were talking about Gordonstoun. What was Andrew like as a young man? You've got new interviews in your book from people who knew him at school. What was he like?
Yeah, I interviewed about a dozen people who were at school with him, including friends of mine, and I'm afraid he was exactly the same. I mean, he was envious of people's wealth. There were very rich families there, like Niarchos family. He was arrogant, entitled, didn't feel the rules applied to him, naive, lazy. So I'm afraid Child is father of the man. I mean, one of the things that they said was that this was an accident waiting to happen.
My gosh, it's like, in my experience of doing this job, it feels people struggle to find somebody who has something good to say about Andrew.
I did struggle. I tried very hard because I like to have balanced books. I mean, there are people who said that he was effective as a special representative. You sometimes have to wonder if people are being rather sycophantic. And a lot of people who said nice things about him when he was, should we say, was a special trade representative are now slightly reining back on that. But yeah, it is quite difficult. He was spoilt. I mean, he was spoilt by the Queen. He had no boundaries. And he was allowed to get away with it, and he has all through his life. And
do you think that this has something about the ring of it, like you know, the problem of being the spare, as we saw in Prince Harry's book as well? Is it a case that Andrew's always been searching for some kind of identity? But you know, in the case of Andrew, it's been expressed through pomposity and reportedly being a bully. His father, the Duke of Edinburgh, once described him as being a natural boss.
Yeah, I don't think he's a natural boss. In fact, it was one of his problems in the Navy that he didn't have leadership qualities. And I don't think the spare argument really holds. I mean, you see Prince Edward and Princess Anne finding a role for themselves, following public duty, and he could easily have done that. In fact, there were times when he was being pushed as the sort of the charismatic popular royal, and he dreamt at one point that he might be regent until William came to power, that Charles, because of his marital problems, would have to stand down. So, no, I think the thing, he is looking for identity, but he's really looking for, he wants to rely on status, because there's very little there to him. And so all he has is his position as a member of the royal family.
But why do you think, what's your opinion on why he is the one who comes across as spoiled, pompous, you know, unpleasant, when you just said yourself, like, you know, Edward and Charles don't read that way at all?
Well, it could be just the genes. That's one factor, and how they played out. It could be that as he was the favourite of the Queen, he was part of that second family. Edward always had a good relationship with Philip. The relationship with Philip and Andrew was a bit more complex, love-hate relationship. But the Queen, I think, felt sorry for him. I think she felt he was probably her most vulnerable child because of his naivety I think it's just sometimes character. You know, it's very clear. I have lots of stories of his, you know, pretty bullying behaviour really from a child. And I think it's just the way he is, I'm afraid.
Gosh, well, you talk about Andrew going on to be a naval officer. Of course, he famously served in the Falklands War in 1982, which we'll talk about more. But you've unearthed evidence that he cheated his way through Staff College.
Yes, I talked to a lot of his naval colleagues and have quite a lot in his naval career. I mean, he really was over-promoted. I mean, people didn't know what to do with him. He never really had accurate staff reports, things called 260s. And he was sent to Staff College basically to sort of didn't know what to do with him. So when he was there, he was very lazy. A friend of mine at Gordonson used to do his homework for him, and he hadn't done his paper to get through. And so he got, Neil Blair, his private secretary, got this high-flying Oxford graduate to take the paper for him, and he passed and got through. And this officer has the thank you note from Andrew. At least he did that.
That's absolutely crazy. Do you think that Andrew thinks he's smart? Do you know what I mean? Do you think he thinks that actually he is where he is on merit, or it's just?
Yes, I think he does.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he will engage people. I mean, pilots, much more skilled pilots than him, on the technicalities of flying planes and things. You know, he's so stupid he doesn't realise how stupid he is.
That's quite a line. Now, let's talk about this HMS Broadsword incident that you've reported on when he was ordered off.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. It came to me from a reliable source who served with him. And the story is that Andrew ordered a stoking party to go and do some work in between watches in the middle of the night. He didn't go out and supervise it himself, as he should have done. The chief stoker was so enraged by this that he actually went to Andrew's cabin and attacked him with a heavy metal instrument.
Wow.
And the whole thing was covered up.
Now, I tried to research this. I actually got someone to talk to the first lieutenant of Broadsword. The claims were he never served on Broadsword. It couldn't have happened. So I'm just sort of put it there in the footnote in the hope that someone might come forward and fill out the story. Did it happen on another ship, or was he actually on Broadsword? I've contacted people through forums on Broadsword. No one has responded, which is interesting. They've neither denied it or confirmed it. So it's one of those mysteries. But both of them were kicked off, basically.
Interesting. Well, we did mention the Falklands War. What have you uncovered about his service?
Well, I mean, there's lots of material in Navy forums that he didn't really serve and he was protected, and that's not true. I talked to Rafe Wick-Sneed, who was his commanding officer, very trustworthy source, Andrew, and also two of the four members of his crew. And, you know, he went out on those Sea King operations, very dangerous work in the darkness. He did that, you know, shift on, shift off, basically. And he did his job. I mean, and it shows that when he's given something a focus, he can actually rise to the occasion. So I don't think anyone can take away from what he did during the Falklands. People say he was just delivering mail and milk. But, you know, he was involved in decoy for Exocets. He was doing search and rescue. He was doing anti-submarine search. So he had a pretty good war, I'd say.
But everything you've said up until that point had made me worry that I'd be nervous to serve with him, I think.
Well, there were people who were nervous of serving with him, partly because, you know, he was a target, but also he didn't always do all the work that was necessary. He wasn't as good a pilot as some of his colleagues, and people were nervous about that. But he had very good engineers dealing with him. He was given preferential treatment in the fact that people who worked with him were vetted, and his helicopters were always a little bit better serviced than other people's.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to who you called the happiest divorced couple. Prince Andrew, Sarah Ferguson became engaged in 1986. They divorced 10 years later, but you believe that there were concerns about Fergie within the royal family from the beginning.
Yes, I mean, the Queen actually asked her, why did you marry, of concerns about Andrew too. She asked, why did you marry Andrew? But they did their research. I mean, she'd been part of a pretty fast crowd when she was a chalet girl in Verbier. And there were rumours of drug use. Some of the people there actually had been convicted of drug use. And reports were prepared for the palace, and basically people came in and they kind of dry cleaned her life before that. Her flatmate had all her pictures taken.
A lot easier to do back in the 80s, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, stuff has appeared. Actually, there have been salacious pictures of Fergie appearing in foreign press, but nothing here.
Well, it seems that those concerns seem to be borne out by early marriage troubles between the pair, including alleged affairs.
Yes, I have to be careful for libel, but I mean, there are allegations that both of them had affairs pretty early in the marriage.
And you also revealed that at one point the palace wanted to brief that the Duchess was suffering a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, it's sort of what they did with Diana, and the Queen overruled this. I mean, the fact is that Fergie really had a nervous breakdown. She was behaving very strangely. I mean, she was running off with the children, going travelling and disappearing, and with her financial advisor, John Bryan. And so there were concerns, and she did check in to a practice in Paddington, and I think she's admitted publicly that she has had counselling for many years now.
And is that, again, was that deemed to be as the pressures of being in the royal family?
Well, I think one of the really strong elements in her childhood was her mother leaving the family to go off with an Argentinian polo player. And she says that sense of abandonment has shaped her life and forced her, for example, to take up eating too much and to have very low self-esteem and to want to please people. And I think that's true. But I think, yes, she was a sort of slightly out of water in the royal family. She didn't, you know, Diana knew how to behave. Fergie was a breath of fresh air. Everyone loved that to start with, and then it was just a little bit too much of a breath of fresh air.
It's so interesting, isn't it, that we do as the public, we embrace that new feeling in the royal family, but then it feels like they sort of like get battened into a pigeonhole.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, you know, there were worries that, you know, she was taking too many holidays, that she was vulgar was the comment made by the Queen's private secretary, Lord Charteris, that she wasn't always doing as much as she could do in terms of public duties. So, she's a very charismatic, jovial character, larger-than-life character. But, she is very flawed, and I think people realise that she couldn't be controlled. And she had this great buddy in Diana, and the two of them kind of plotted their escape. They always used to watch The Great Escape was their favourite film.
That's fascinating. But then, of course, in 1992, what the Queen's Annus Horribilis, we had probably the peak Fergie moment in many people's minds, so-called Toegate, when she was photographed with American businessman, her advisor John Bryan, in the French Riviera. What have you uncovered about that?
Well, I managed to talk to some new people. In fact, I got through to Daniel Angeli, who was the photographer. And I think there's several things there. One is that it wasn't just one photographer, there were several. They were very, very close. The pictures are very close up. They were taken over several days. And this, of course, raises all sorts of questions about royal security. You had the two protection officers literally sitting there in the pool a dozen yards away from the photographer. They'd been warned that there were photographers in the area, and nothing seems to have been done. They'd been very open about this so-called secret getaway. There's stories about tip-offs in the palace and from Diana herself. But the fact is that, there were presumably informers at the airport and before who knew about it. And they just passed the word back. They'd hired 2 expensive cars. It was just, they weren't very good at disguising their affair. There were even rumours that John Bryan himself had leaked the story.
Yeah.
So it is a slight mystery of how the story got out, who leaked it. But they were very foolish.
Well, it's interesting because what you were saying earlier about Fergie and Diana being conspirators, but then the Mail's Richard Kay said that Diana messaged him the night before the publication of those photos and sort of rather cryptically said the redhead's in trouble. Do we believe that she would have tipped off journalists?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, Fergie and her mother claimed publicly it was the palace. But certainly the relationship with Diana was a complex one.
Right.
I mean, it was Diana who actually introduced her to Andrew, in effect, brought her into the famous Ascot meeting where they, at the profiterole, and the relationship took off. And, they were great friends, the children the same age, roughly. Diana would come across to Sunning Hill every weekend. They were going to leave the royal family at the same time. It was going to be a double whammy. And then Diana realised that she needed to distance herself from Fergie, that she was a bit of a liability. At one point, Charles said to Diana, "Why can't you be more like Fergie?" So,
in fact, that would have been amazing to see.
So, the things kind of changed. But I think Fergie then felt a bit betrayed because Diana then kind of let her kind of leave and to see what would happen. But Diana was jealous of Fergie's good relationship with the Queen, and Fergie was jealous of Diana's elegance and the fact that she was able to get away with things that Fergie couldn't.
Exactly. And do you think that Diana was possibly, with Toegate, just thrilled that somebody else was the scandal focus for once?
Well, there's a lot of that. We mustn't
Yeah.
say Toegate. John Bryan is very adamant that he was kissing her toes. He's not quite so worried
I'm
about
sorry,
what
John,
he was
it's
doing.
Toegate. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of briefing against they're like little rival courts.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of briefing between the courts to distract attention from their principal and put the attention on someone else.
Yeah.
And so, certainly that was going on. They were all doing it. And so it's certainly a possibility.
Something I'm fascinated with is what was Andrew's relationship like with William and Harry?
Not good. It's
Shocker.
It's interesting, and I mean the line is that when William comes to power, Andrew will be toast, and so he should do whatever deal he's going to do with Charles. I think Charles realises that. Charles is more forgiving. He's the sibling. I mean that's again a difficult relationship. But William, I think, is a much more pragmatic and sort of independent, cool-hearted view. He sees as a liability to the monarchy, and Andrew has not always been very polite about Catherine, and of course William is very protective of his wife. So, but they're two very different characters. I mean, I think he would be appalled if he knew exactly the full story, which I suspect he doesn't, of actually what Andrew's been up to.
Right. And Harry, do you think there's any sense of camaraderie, like almost like a kindred spirit, like another sort of outsider?
Well, there are certain similarities. I mean, you made the point about the spare, this idea of, going through life in some ways being demoted further down the pecking order. Neither of them are very bright. Both of them are pretty entitled. Both of them are weak men with strong wives, ambitious wives. So there are interesting parallels there. But I think Harry still doesn't have much time for him.
There are so many fascinating things in this book. There's something here, you note Fergie's propensity to become obsessed with individuals, from John Kennedy Jr. to Kevin Costner to Tiger Woods. What's your opinion behind this kind of compulsive emotional behaviour?
Well, I think it's back to the sense of abandonment. She's a woman who's looking for love. She didn't find it in her marriage, and she sought it in other relationships with other people who she felt could take care of her. That was John Bryan's role in many ways. She's often gone for much older father figures. I mean, her relationship with Paddy McNally, he was much, much older. She goes for much richer men who can take care of her. And I think she's drawn to glamour. She's drawn to stars. It's not a coincidence that all these people are well known and have glamour attached to them. So she's had a whole series of obsessions, and she will drop everything and do the most extraordinary things. Fly across the world, drive across Britain. She's had it with some of her financial mentors, the businessmen supporting her. She had it with an artist called Paul Gaisford. She switches, and she's quite mercurial, so she'll fall vehemently in love with someone and then she'll fall out. And it's the same with the way she treats her staff. One moment everyone's in and they're wonderful, the next minute they're being cold-shouldered and they don't know what they've done that's wrong.
Wow. Well, speaking of compulsive emotional behaviour, it's fair to say, before we talk about Jeffrey Epstein, that Prince Andrew was apparently a sex addict long before he came into Epstein's orbit.
Yes, I mean, he was called Randy Andy even at school, and I have stories of his sexual activities. He's clearly highly sexed. Various numbers have been quoted at me, ranging from 1,000 to 3,000 women that he slept with. And, people talk about it. He was good looking, I mean, he was a prince, and women threw themselves at them. I mean, he was a notch on their bedpost, and he took advantage of that.
He must have thought he was a god.
Well, I think he did.
Yeah.
And I mean, you see, for example, that interview he did with Selena Scott, he's flirting with her openly. He could be, in his own way, very charming. He was very flirtatious, and a lot of women fell for that. He was very, very successful.
Well, and indeed, and you also revealed that he shared a lover with Epstein in Ghislaine Maxwell, but also a mistress with Bill Clinton. What?
Yes, that's a great story. It came to me from a member of staff in one of the British diplomats in New York. I think I know who the woman is. I can't say, but
okay.
But yeah, they and Clinton, of course, swam in the same circles. I mean, he was also involved with Epstein, also on the Lolita Express.
Yeah.
So they crossed over a lot, as he did with Trump.
And, well, we should say, obviously, that Prince Andrew has always denied having sex with underage girls, including with Virginia Giuffre, who he paid a settlement to in 2022 without admitting liability. But it is unquestionable, is it not, that Epstein introduced young women to Prince Andrew?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I have a woman, Sarah, I talk about. Quite a lot of stuff was taken out for legal reasons, but I think there's absolutely no doubt that there were two prongs to the relationship with Epstein. One was Epstein gave him useful contacts, which is what he said in Newsnight, and vice versa. I mean, useful contacts business-wise, but I think also Epstein, and his modus operandi, provided women, and of course then used it to blackmail people. And Andrew, I'm afraid, fell into that trap, in that honey trap. Not just with Epstein, but many other people as well. And
obviously it's very news sensitive at the moment, because it was through Epstein that Prince Andrew met President Donald Trump. Wasn't president then, but what was their relationship?
Well, I mean, the two things that they had in common, which they always talked about, was women and golf. So absolutely, they were very matey. And though Trump has denied it since and tried to distance himself, I mean, there's plenty of evidence of them meeting together, being photographed, and I've got plenty of testimony of people talking about their meetings. So there's no doubt. I mean, again, they were all swimming in the same pool.
I think probably the most shocking and frankly appalling revelation in your book is that Virginia Giuffre was selected or even ordered from a catalogue.
Yes, one of the things that was found when the FBI raided Epstein's home in Palm Beach were these basically photo books of girls. And that's been confirmed also by the Panorama program on Andrew. There were these girls there, and people basically ordered them up like a takeaway. Have it away, Dave.
What do you think? It's probably legally a difficult thing to talk about. Do you really think that Epstein was blackmailing Prince Andrew?
The Virginia Giuffre has gone on the record saying that that's exactly what Epstein was doing. And Steve Hoffenberg, who was a business associate of Epstein, said that Andrew and Clinton were his two Super Bowl trophies. So he used both of them, and he had cameras everywhere. And why would he have cameras? Why would he be filming them if he wasn't going to use that? He was pretty ruthless.
Well, before we come to the infamous Newsnight interview in 2019, where Prince Andrew claimed he couldn't have had sex with a teenage girl in Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse because he was at home after attending a children's party at a Pizza Express in Woking. But you've spoken to witnesses who saw Andrew at the nightclub Tramp with Virginia that night.
Yes, I haven't spoken to them myself. I've got this as it's secondhand from other people. But there's, I think 3 different people who talk about seeing him there. I've also been in touch with the protection officer who says that he came back to Buckingham Palace that night. The government or the palace have refused to release the logs at Buckingham Palace, the security gate, which they should release under data protection rules to the protection officer. First of all, they said that they were part of national security, then they said they'd been destroyed. But the protection officer is adamant that Andrew came back. In fact, he was very rude to them, which is why they remember. So I don't think there's any doubt that he was in London that evening. No one remembers the pizza party, and in fact, I think a diary produced by the family suggested he was getting a manicure that afternoon rather than being at the pizza party. But you can get up to London from Woking quite quickly. You can go to both.
True. But you believe the palace tried to suppress the Epstein story when it threatened to break?
Absolutely, and they've tried that repeatedly. So there's a famous story, Amy Robach, who was a well-known journalist on ABC, had an interview with Virginia Giuffre talking about this many years before the story broke. The palace threatened ABC, saying that they would withhold access to particularly the Prince and Princess of Wales, and ABC backed down and killed the story. And there have been other instances of the palace basically downplaying the story or, as I say, doing this horse trading to prevent the story coming out.
And of course, Fergie is also linked to Epstein, according to an ex-girlfriend of Prince Andrew's.
Well, I think there's plenty of evidence that she in fact knew Epstein as well as her husband, ex-husband. You know, the 18 phone numbers for her in the famous Black Book, only 16 for Andrew. She was flying in 1998 on the Lolita Express. Andrew was there only, we think, in 1999. There are legal depositions showing her at the place in Palm Beach and also in Manhattan throughout this period. And I have 3 different witnesses showing her actually staying in Epstein's flats after 2010 when she said she'd cut off all contact with him. But you're absolutely right. The line is that she only ever had £15,000 from Epstein. She's actually got the Daily Mail and others to correct reports saying that she got more. But I have, again, several sources, including this ex-girlfriend, saying that there were much larger sums. And, of course, that would make sense.
And what sort of sums are we talking?
2 million was the sum I was given.
Wow. OK, so that's a little bit different from 15,000. You also believe that Andrew lied about when he first met Epstein and about his December 2010 meeting 2 years after Epstein had pled guilty in a Florida court to soliciting prostitution from a minor.
His line was that he met Epstein in 1999. Well, he was going off to the island literally in February 2000. We know from a letter that Alistair Watson, his own private secretary, wrote to the Times that actually they met in 1990. And Steve Hoffenberg, who was the business associate of Epstein, says it was 1991. So, I mean, it certainly wasn't 1999. In terms of meeting him after he served a period didn't really serve a correctional term, but 08 to 09, he basically was on day release from the prison. And Andrew continued to see him. He had the famous goodbye in December 2010, where he stayed for 5 days and had a dinner party thrown in his honour. But we now know from legal depositions in other cases that he was still in touch with him and having meetings in 2011. So everything, I have a whole section in the book where I go through all the lies he told in Newsnight.
And it's interesting, isn't it, because all of that information was out there for the dedicated researcher, and yet he still thought the Newsnight interview was a good idea. How did that come about?
Well, it's not just he thought it was a good idea, he thought it had gone extremely well.
Yeah.
The real story on the Newsnight interview is that actually it was Panorama who had done the work on this. They're a programme based in Northern Ireland. And they had an interview with Virginie Giuffre. They'd done an investigation. They'd interviewed a lot of people. And they were giving the palace a right of reply. That was the initial request that went in. At the same time, Newsnight were also trying to get an interview, but to talk about his time as special representative. And I think the palace decided that it was better to have what they thought might be a soft interview from Newsnight than to have this interview with Panorama. So Panorama were asked to basically, the decision was made in the BBC, and the BBC at times tried to suppress this Panorama investigation, I should say, again possibly with pressure from the palace. But Newsnight, various individuals there have made a career out of the Newsnight interview, but the fact is that they were handed the material from Panorama 72 hours before transmission. And the real hero of this story is a woman called Laura Burns, who was absolutely cut out of the script, has never really been mentioned until now, and I hope she now gets her proper due.
Wow. Well, before we move on, 2 quick-fire questions on Russia. Do the Russians actually have compromat on Andrew, and was Andrew seduced by a Russian spy?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
And not just...
I knew that was going to be the answer, but
Not just the Russians, the Libyans, the Middle East, people in Kazakhstan, you name it, they've all got compromat on Andrew. Everyone has said that girls would be provided for him, and they would of course be filmed. And in terms of your second question, absolutely. The woman seduced him in a hotel in Knightsbridge. She gave him a Mac computer which was bugged. She gave him £25,000 loan to help one of the children go to Switzerland. We've all got terribly focused on the Chinese spy. There were a lot of spies, I'm afraid, around Andrew and indeed Sarah Ferguson. And I think some of that story I try and bring out in the book, and I think there's other stuff which clearly I couldn't talk about, but I hope will eventually emerge.
What's that quote from the alleged Chinese spy, the useful idiot?
Yes, there were a lot of useful idiots around. He was a useful idiot to a lot of people. And he was, because he was, both of them are very greedy and don't really do due diligence. They were very, very easy targets, soft-hanging fruit.
Oh, my goodness. You discuss in the book an Argentine assassination plot on the private island of Mystique in the Caribbean. Is this Prince Andrew's real life or a James Bond plot?
No, the Argentinian junta had planned at the time of the Falklands War to assassinate him. He actually, after the Falklands, went off to Mystique with Coustark. It was never implemented, but it was certainly planned, and there were also planned attacks on the dockyards in Portsmouth and on Ascension Island, which is a big naval base. So it was, certainly planned, and there have been several assassination threats against Andrew, including one by the IRA to get him on a golf course. And this is why he doesn't do royal duties, because I think probably there is a threat against his life. There's a woman called Irene Windsor who turned up at Royal Lodge.
Yes, I remember.
And managed, got the policeman to pay a taxi fare, and turned up and that's the main thing.
Do you know much about whether or not Prince Andrew was more of a prized target in that sense, or is it just simply because he was more gettable than other royals? Or
I don't know. I mean, there have been lots of attempts, clearly, on members of the royal family. I think, people will try lots of people, but I think the threat against him was that he was a serving naval officer, so a bit like you've seen as a legitimate target, a bit like Mountbatten in '79. He's a senior member of the royal family. I think he was out and about. He was going to nightclubs. He was clearly on naval bases it was difficult, but he was out and about at China Whites and Tramp and elsewhere.
not sweating?
Not sweating, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It could easily, and of course now there will be people who kind of think they might be doing people a service. So, I'm always slightly amazed when I see pictures of him, riding on his horse in Windsor Great Park with just a groom, that there isn't more protection.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was just about to ask you, post Newsnight, post the Giuffre settlement, and obviously her tragic death by suicide, what is the reality of his day-to-day life now?
Well, his reality is he's slightly under house arrest. I mean, he lives in Royal Lodge. I mean, he clearly sees his family. He gets invited to shooting weekends. He sees friends. He's obsessed with watching videos of planes landing. He's obsessed with Boeing. Of course, have had lots of scandals about the planes. He, when Fergie isn't there, he gets masseurs to come in and give him massages, in inverted commas, which he likes to have to the sound of country music.
Good detail.
So, he's there. There are stories that he continues to do. There are stories that he has been given a house in Abu Dhabi, that he goes to the Middle East. I've heard stories of him flying out from small airports in private jets and going abroad. He's playing golf. There are stories of him playing golf in Portugal. So it's not a bad life.
Yeah, it could be worse.
He's 65. He in effect lives the life of a retired gentleman.
What do you think, I know it's a difficult one to speculate on, but do you have any sense at all about what his reflections are on all of this? Does he have any regrets about his actual conduct, or is he more just furious that he was found out?
Well, I think his feeling is that he's sad that he's no longer a member of the royal family. He has the trappings of being a member of the royal family. That's what he loved. I don't get any sense, because I think he generally feels he's innocent of anything he did with Virginia Giuffre and others. I think he just feels that it's, he's been unfairly treated. He's entitled to do some things he's doing. I think there are no very strict moral boundaries in his life. No one ever telling him what's right and wrong. So I don't think he does. And if we remember, he's still, though he's not allowed to use it, he's still Duke of York. I mean, the Duchess still uses her title long after she's been divorced. He's still a member of the Garter,
Yes.
even though he doesn't go out on publications. And I think he's still a Vice Admiral. I think the Queen said just to keep him happy. So, he hasn't, actually paid the full price for what he's done.
And it's interesting because Prince Andrew has been, sidelined, been pushed out of the spotlight. But Sarah Ferguson, at least for the moment, seems to have been sort of like quietly welcomed back in. What do you think she's learned about her journey?
I think she's learned absolutely nothing. She just keeps repeating the same mistakes, and that she just distances herself, goes on Oprah, everyone forgives her and says what a kooky lady and how eccentric, and she's allowed to do all the stuff that she's done before. I think the feeling is that they need to keep her close. One of the themes of my book is her constant threats to spill the beans about Andrew and the royal family, and therefore it's much better to keep her on board than to have her outside the tent. I think that's part of it. People generously say she's friendly with Camilla, she's manipulated her, Charles doesn't want to have any more fights in the family, they think she's been very loyal to Andrew. But she sticks close to the royal family because that's her brand. Her whole business career has been based on being a member of the royal family. She'd be absolutely nothing without it. So she's going to stick in there. They can't, I mean, the late Queen and Prince Philip were very worried. I mean, they just couldn't. She was like a limpet. She wouldn't leave Andrew, living with him when, they felt he needed to break free and have new relationships.
Yeah.
She was back in there, and she's never really left his houses. I mean, even though they've been divorced now, as you say, since 1996.
Do you think there's any way back for Andrew in terms of public-facing royal duties?
No, I think for two reasons. One is that he will never do what's required to basically say he's sorry, and I think the other thing is no one is prepared to forgive him what he's done.
When you say no one, you mean the public, or?
I think the public,
Yeah.
and I think increasingly the palace are realising this, and I think once they see some of the material in the book, which I think it says about financial, not sexual scandal. Epstein is a side story to this.
Right.
I think they will be feeling that they have to distance him. I mean, he's going to have to be stuck in Balmoral in a tower and not allowed out.
Andrew, are you braced for the reaction to this book? What are you expecting?
Well, I'm expecting people to try and discredit it, to say I made it up, that I'm not a serious historian. With my last book, I found that people were briefing that there was nothing new in my book, which had a lot of new original research. I'm all set for the sycophantic historians and others who surround the royal family putting the boot in. But the fact is, Andrew and Fergie have been protected for far too long, and we need the full story to come out. And that's the role of biographers and journalists, to tell the truth.
And you'll just live without that Christmas card?
I have no interest in a Christmas card or being knighted or going to the palace or anything else.
Well, I cannot wait to read the full book. Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
an astonishing interview. I feel like I might need to go and have a little lie down after that. I don't know about you, but for our viewers and listeners at home, you will find a link below to Andrew's latest book entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. A reminder that you can sign up to the free royal newsletter by going to the on-screen link or by using your phone camera to scan the QR code that you'll find on screen now. If you love Palace Confidential, I'm sure you'll love the newsletter. Just time to say thanks again to my very special guest, Andrew Loney, and to you for watching. Of course, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
On the 25th of December 2023, royal watchers in Sandringham were shocked by a sight not seen in more than 30 years. Sarah, Duchess of York, attending the annual Royal Christmas service with the rest of the firm. After decades of gaffes, business blowouts and innumerable red-top scandals, we were witnessing something of a Christmas miracle. Fergie was back in the fold. The Duchess, who as far back as 1992 had been told by Princess Margaret, and I quote, "You have done more to bring shame on the family than could ever have been imagined." That same Fergie has somehow managed the most unlikely of Sandringham sequels. No wonder jaws were on the floor. However, within 2 short years, Fergie would be banished for a second time. Only on this occasion, her Duchess title would also be going in the muck. Like her husband, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, her lies about contacting the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein after claiming all contact had been broken off was the final straw for King Charles. On this episode of Reading the Royals, we're going to explore how Sarah Ferguson had it all, lost it all, got it all back, then lost it all again. We're going to do this by investigating a series of fascinating images taken across her life that reveal the secret signs hidden in plain sight that now allow us to appreciate that Fergie wasn't waving, she was drowning. The crucial question being, was Sarah Ferguson a serial victim of circumstance, as she so often claimed, or was she, to put it crudely, an inveterate chancer who, after decades of bluff and blaggery, found herself suddenly, in her own words, stripped bare? Sarah Margaret Ferguson was born in London on the 15th of October 1959 to parents Susan and Major Ronald Ferguson. After her paternal grandfather died in 1969, the family inherited an 800-acre dairy farm, Dummer Down in Hampshire. The Ferguson family moved to the farm when Sarah was 10, and according to the ex-Duchess, she adored growing up in the countryside. Sarah's upbringing was unusual from the start, as her father was polo manager to the Prince of Wales, meaning she grew up surrounded by young royals. This included her future husband, Prince Andrew, who was just 4 months her junior. Indeed, according to some accounts, the young prince would sometimes play tag with Sarah while they watched their fathers play polo. However, behind the facade of bucolic bliss, Sarah was subject to the cruel and sometimes violent whims of her mother. According to the ex-Duchess, as a toddler, a red vein would sometimes appear on the centre of her forehead, which her mother called the sign of the devil, and on these occasions her mother would attempt to, and I quote, beat the devil out of me. When Sarah was 12, her mother moved to Argentina to be with her lover and future husband, Hector Barrantes. In an interview in 2023, Sarah noted, "I never truly understood why my mother left me, and it has taken me a long time to deal with my low self-esteem." In a separate 22 interview, she stated, "I just had my hair cut really badly. Then Mum left and went to live in Argentina. So from the age of 12, I felt she left me because she didn't like my haircut. I felt that it was all my fault that Dad had been left on his own to raise my sister and I." Setting aside Fergie's very specific take on the straight line causality between a child's dodgy haircut and her mother moving to another continent, it's clear that deeper issues abounded from an early age, namely appearance and abandonment. With hindsight, it's now easy to posit that marrying into a family which regularly provokes global headlines and comes with forensic scrutiny of conduct was perhaps not the best choice for a young woman with crippling anxiety and poor impulse control. But in typical Fergie fashion, if she was going to make a big mistake, she was going to make it with the throttle fully open, which takes me to the first picture I want to explore. Taken in June 1983, it shows a 21-year-old Diana, Princess of Wales, and a 23-year-old Sarah Ferguson at the Guards Polo Club in Windsor. Although Fergie wouldn't marry Andrew until July 1986, I think this image perfectly represents the sum of all hopes for the House of Windsor in the early 80s. For context, by the late 70s, the firm was widely regarded as stale and aloof, barely teetering along. It was an institution clearly out of step with the difficult economic conditions of the period and utterly disconnected from the punk-era youth who regarded the phrase "God save the Queen" as a sick punchline to an obnoxious joke. With the introduction of Diana and Sarah Ferguson into the mix, there was a genuine feeling among royalists that the monarchy had turned a corner, had been revitalised and re-energised by these charismatic, intuitive women. Here were royals who felt like real people rather than dour, distant figureheads. The fact that it was Diana who reintroduced Andrew and Fergie at Ascot in 1985 also added a sense that the Princess of Wales was perhaps going to change the monarchy for the better, from the inside, that the firm had turned a brighter, better corner. But alas, as we know, just 9 years after this photograph was taken, both Diana and Sarah Ferguson would be ousted from the firm. The revolution had been terminated. The monarchy was not for turning. Which brings us to the second image I want to explore. Taken in June 1993, it shows Prince Andrew, the Duchess of York and their 3-year-old daughter Eugenie at the Upton House School Sports Day. It has been less than a year since Fergie's affair with an American businessman, John Bryan, made headlines around the world. And I believe the discomfort in Andrew's face is apparent for all to see. But what really fascinates me is Fergie's expression. It's clear that she looks a little uncomfortable. But when we zoom in for a closer look, we see something else. A kind of vacant disconnect from the reality of the situation. Almost as if she thinks by pretending nothing is wrong, by existing in a kind of real-life family costume drama, that as long as the bad thing isn't brought up by anyone, everything is just fine. As long as no one mentions the betrayal and infidelity and global headlines, everything will be just a-okay. In a previous episode of Reading the Royals, on the subject of the fall of the House of York, I said that Sarah Ferguson had come to be widely perceived as a deeply unserious person. And I believe this image goes some way to illustrate what I was alluding to. That is, Fergie's seeming, unfailing inability to fully grasp the gravity of any situation she found herself in. To my mind, there are only two plausible explanations for this. One, that as a chronic people pleaser, the idea of being in trouble with those she sought to impress amounted to an existential crisis, something which, out of fear, she simply had to block out of her mind. Or secondly, Sarah Ferguson was the Del Boy Duchess. For our American viewers, Del Boy was a character in the long-running British sitcom Only Fools and Horses. He was a kind of Homer Simpson character in that every episode would begin with Del Boy's latest get-rich-quick scheme, which by the end of every episode would completely blow up in his face. And no matter how calamitous the consequences, Del Boy would simply go straight on to his next madcap scheme, no looking back, never feeling sorry for himself, never giving up hope that the next grift would be the one that made Del Boy the millions he had dreamed of from childhood. And like Del Boy, Sarah Ferguson did appear to many down the years as a witless, plucky rascal with a never-say-die attitude and a heart of gold. So far, so benign. However, later revelations about Fergie's relationship with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein would bring that impression into sharp relief. At least the part about the heart of gold, but more on that later. In 2011, 15 years after her divorce from Prince Andrew, Fergie told Harper's Bazaar, and I quote, "I didn't want a divorce, but had to because of circumstance. I wanted to work. It's not right for a princess of the royal house to be commercial. So Andrew and I decided to make the divorce official." This remark struck a number of royal commentators as peculiar, given the fact that Sarah's career as a children's author began in 1989, 7 years before her divorce. Indeed, Fergie's first high-profile business failure, the supposed high-end retirement community Castlecare, also collapsed before her divorce. So I guess we should perhaps ignore the ex-Duchess's memory lapse about it being somehow wrong for a princess to be commercial. Nonetheless, her 1989 authorial breakthrough title was Budgie, the Little Helicopter, a series she has always denied plagiarised the 1964 children's book Hector the Helicopter by Arthur W. Baldwin, a book about a plucky little helicopter who goes on adventures and makes new friends along the way. Despite the controversy, Budgie went on to have genuine success, being commissioned as a children's animated series that was shown in the UK and America, as well as being released on DVD in several international territories. Which brings me to the next photograph I want to examine. Taken in December 1995, outside the world-famous Bloomingdale's in New York, it illustrates very neatly, in my view, the second phase of Fergie's adventures in fortune hunting, namely, becoming a media personality in the United States. This is the chapter that would see the ex-Duchess flog hair straighteners and juicers on the shopping channel QVC, write a